Got Ben White and Jacob Perry here with me. Ben is our regional account manager for the Tola Mountain region, and Jacob is our sales engineer here at RCN headquarters. Lastly, I'm Mark Indelicato. I am the content marketing specialist for RCN, as well as your host today. How we doing?
Doing well.
Yeah.
Doing good.
Nice.
Always glad to be here.
For sure. Yeah. Glad to have you guys with us. I think it's going to be a great webinar.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And if it's not, we would have thought.
Yeah. Let's see you later. You're on your own, buddy. Cool. So looking at our agenda, we'll begin with a POTS overview, and then we're going to dive into a SLED discussion. It really might have state, local government, K-12, higher ed. We'll see if we keep that order. I have a feeling we might jump around a little bit, but it'll be a good discussion nonetheless. After that, we're going to talk about our POTS over LTE kit and how it can help you with your goals, whether you're directly replacing POTS lines or you're working with a customer that is. So lastly, we'll have our Q&A session where we will take your questions about anything we've covered today, whether we've covered it or not, I guess. Well, any questions? Ben's got your pie questions, so we've got the gamut covered. But yeah, to participate in that, just type out your question in the Q&A section in the sidebar, and we'll get to it in that area. We've got different types of POTS lines here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how common are POTS lines? Do people, realize that, oh, this is run on POTS? I didn't,
Yeah, honestly, if I'm looking at this and Jacob, kick in, but from a sales perspective, what I see when I'm talking to customers, what they're worried about most, voice lines sometimes, depends on if it's an emergency use phone line, like an old call phone or something. You see a lot of those in older buildings or disability ADA type buildings that are specifically for folks that are impaired for some reason. They'll have those lines because you got to have something. Fax lines, elevators if you need them, and then definitely your alarm systems and panic buttons. And that's kind of where I see the majority of our conversations happening. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely those are the big ones. I completely agree with that. Voice lines aren't as common. The more I've seen them, the more I've noticed that they're in places where just getting the wire into the walls and through the ceilings isn't worth the money to just keep the POTS lines in places. Otherwise, most people have moved to VoIP. Same thing with elevators. It's so much infrastructure to move those systems in a moving system. The biggest shocking one for me has been HVAC systems.
Yep.
We've had a couple of those, and before we really started getting deep into this, I didn't even realize that HVAC systems used POTS lines.
Yeah,
that was crazy to me.
Yeah. The HVAC system, but along with that, it's very similar communication. So on the networking side, HVAC, we see a lot of third-party folks coming in because it's a specific flavor of networking, right? So HVAC we see managed, but SCADA is another very similar to HVAC that I'm seeing a lot of. Anywhere that deals with pumps, meter reading, if it's a utility base for water, gas, or sewer. There's a lot of SCADA applications. They need to make sure pumps are running right. They need to make sure subdivisions don't get flooded out during storms. So I'm seeing a lot of SCADA in the public sector group as well.
Nice. Yeah, I know I learned it, just a couple of those terms from you guys just the other day. So it's some foreshadowing into how great of speakers these two are going to be. So next, we're going to look at the cost of POTS lines. I know it's all over the place. We ran this poll to our viewers on LinkedIn several months ago, honestly. So I probably need to do it again. I'm curious if this has changed any, but you can see the $50 to $100 is by far the most common.
From a monetary perspective, there's two things that on the public sector side. So commercial and public sector are fairly different on how much money they spend. First of all, it's the long-term or duration of the contract.
Right.
Public sector seems to be a much longer relationship, and that contract gets passed from vendor to vendor. Like we saw with CenturyLink. CenturyLink gets sells the lumens and all these different things. Those prices aren't locked in all the time. Sometimes there's issues there, especially if there's infrastructure issues. And if you personally, as the customer, try to change your infrastructure, you could be looking at an additional cost that when you first started your contract wasn't there. You added an elevator, you added a fax line, you put a new building in. That your original cost doesn't get put in the into some kind of box that says it'll never change. And we've seen a lot of uptick from customers saying this last year I've seen an increase. And we're hearing from our partners in telecom that next year is going to be even worse. They don't want, in some situations, to supply POTS solutions. And so they expect the pricing to go up over the next 12 to 24 months as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Next point we're going to look at is field checks. It's one of the more interesting ones that I think isn't necessarily first of mind, but what's the difference between, field checks and POTS lines and some of the newer solutions that you're seeing?
Oh, as in,
I mean, I guess it's sort of a leading question, right? So this is kind of like more of a costly, antiquated way of doing things that has been solved, right, to save people, even more money than necessarily just looking at a phone line individually.
If you took a look at it, and Jacob, you follow up on the meat and potatoes, how it's actually done in the field. But what you're talking about here is what Cradlepoint came to market and said, we can help fix this from a networking standpoint.
Right.
Truck rolls, keeping low IT spend, making sure headcount stays at a minimum, or if you didn't have a choice, making sure that you could handle large projects with a minimum IT headcount. That hasn't happened in the POTS world, right? So where Cradlepoint came in and changed the market on how do we touch all these clients on my network? How do I keep them alive on cellular? Where getting fiber or getting a T1 or better line in it's just not going to happen for us. Cradlepoint did that, but nobody did that on the POTS stuff. A lot of people have tried little stuff. We talked about SCADA, we talked about HVAC. That stuff's been happening for a while, even alarm panels, but it hasn't been happening as a holistic. How do we bring all these endpoints into one single pane of glass? Well, that single pane of glass, that's what Net Cloud Manager became what it was. And so for me, when I look at this, I go, why wouldn't you take everything you've already deployed in your mobile environment, your in-building connectivity, branch environment? Why wouldn't you do that to your POTS solution as well? So for your standpoint, you got to go out into the field. I mean, that's time, that's labor, that's plane tickets. Where do you guys look at when you actually have to go touch this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, time, labor, plane tickets, rental cars, hotel rooms, and we always have to spend as much time as we need to get the job done properly, because there's so much that goes into these, and a lot of you out there, if you've seen your demarcation points, they vary wildly from point to point. And there have been so many companies over the years doing these, and sometimes multiple companies coming in and doing them. So we a lot of times need to come in and see what's there and what needs to be touched, what doesn't need to be touched. A lot of times we'll even discover a lot of lines that are still active, that aren't being utilized in any way, shape, or form. So a lot of times right after the check, you can save money, because we'll say, oh, we found lines X through Y that you're not even utilizing, and those can just be turned off.
It almost feels like you're doing an archaeology dig. Right? When you go through there, there's 40 years worth of equipment, and you got the old school, like, it was made with vegetable oil plastic from the 60s and 70s, and you can see that coming into the 80s, and it's like you can see this progression of equipment, and none of it was ever pulled. It was just added on to.
Yeah.
And so my thought process with that is, you send like a Suddenlink or a CenturyLink back in the day, or anybody that's an ISP provider. One of the things that I've always seen with some of our customers on the cellular side is that they were responsible for anything from the DMARC in. Right. And then your ISP, whoever it may be, was responsible from the DMARC board and out. So if you had a piece of equipment fail, it was 30 years old or something like that, typically they're not coming in to fix it. They're coming in to replace it with a new unit that you don't know what the warranty is. You don't know what the payment fee on that is.
Right.
It is dark, it's dark networking gear, whether you like it or not. It's something that you don't know it's there. You don't know how much you're paying for it, and you don't know how long it's going to be there.
Right.
And what we've seen on several of our pictures is 20, 30 years worth of being there. So it's something to keep in mind, is you're not always in control of what's in your DMARC panel, and you might be paying more for it depending on how your contract was written. And that doesn't matter if you're public safety or commercial. It's going to hamper you either way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we talked about on one of the last ones that you can tell how many companies and how many times it's been worked on, because you can look at the 66 blocks, which is what the POTS lines come off of, and you can see their discoloration per each block. And it's a gradient.
That's exactly, exactly. You see this progression of time go by. And it's all, but the same copper wires are still being used. It's like, so we changed all this infrastructure, but all the old wires are still here. You can't tell me that that's a clean way to do networking. Especially as we're moving away from POTS being a viable solution.
Right.
So
it's definitely had its time to run. What was started in like the 1880s or 90s, I think. POTS lines technically got their beginnings then.
I think it's the 1890s is when we started seeing that infrastructure. In fact, when I did several projects in New York during Sandy, when with cradle points in mind and stuff like that. And honestly, Sandy hit, it's old copper wire with a paper sheath And that got wet, and it
Jesus.
literally separates, leaving the copper exposed, and then you get a grounding issue.
Ooh.
And I'm a dummy,
Yeah.
so maybe it's not grounding, but at the end of the day, it was causing it
Yeah.
to not operate.
Mhm.
We were working with a carrier who said, listen, we cannot afford to dig up the streets, and it would be 6 months before we could get all the permitting to do it.
Man.
We need cellular right now.
Yeah.
So way back during Sandy, we saw, wow, this is something that for most people coast to coast is going to at some point in their life be something it's too old, it's too expensive. What is the new solution moving forward? And POTS replacement kits from us is the gold standard.
Absolutely.
And that you brought up another really important thing, talking about the differences between public sector and commercial. Commercial is typically, oh, come in, do whatever you need, whatever. And then on the public sector side, a lot of these lines are public safety. A lot of these lines are taken very, very seriously and need to be cared for. And so there's often paperwork that needs to be done to go in. Hey, what are you guys touching? What are you pulling up? What are you not touching?
Assurances that everything's going to work when it's done, because you can't just have your panic button stop working, right? Panic button at your local rent-to-own reseller. Okay, we can bring somebody in a couple weeks. Let's make sure the other panic buttons are working.
Yeah.
You have a panic button not working at the, where intake at a local county prison or something like that. That's a major problem.
That's huge.
So anyway,
yeah. Right on. Yeah, I think that covered it pretty well. I do have to say, right before we move on, really got to be interested in how New England looks from that perspective, right? You were saying how New York, had the old paper, just with the population density and the age of that area of the country, especially. Yeah, I would think that's.
Believe it or not, Texas was one of the first states to actually have a bring us into the future grid for both POTS and utilities. They were one of the first states back in late 1800s, early 1900s to actually start implementing electricity, implementing copper lines, railroad stuff. It all tied into that, right? It's keeping that oil
that makes
and
sense.
coal and all those things that back in the day our country ran on.
Yeah.
Keeping those things in communication hubs. And so honestly, what we're seeing is if you follow the railroads, most everywhere that was a major hub, Chicago, right? Cleveland, everywhere around the Great Lakes, everywhere on the West Coast, down in Texas. Yeah. That's where your old infrastructure is. And so it's a coast to coast problem.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I also have to say, I really like follow the railroad as just a slogan. Yeah. There you go. That's your pop stuff.
That is what, that was the bleeding edge of infrastructure back in the day. Yeah. Right.
Right on.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Sorry to.
No, you're fine. Yeah. Sorry.
No,
I love history, so we're good.
Yeah, I was gonna say I always kind of took it as like there was almost a gradient that you could see across the U.S.
It was.
But it seems to come out from the.
It was more of a vein and artery, if you will. So yes, obviously your East Coast infrastructure was probably the first to go in, right?
Right.
Good old Ben Franklin, right? But with that being said, when we talk about the country as a whole, where your commodities were coming from, that's you needed to stay in communication. You needed to know. You needed, coal, oil, commodities coming into how do we get the grain in the breadbasket out to the coast where they can't grow anything? Yeah, that was all important to communicate back then.
Absolutely. So, wow. Yeah, that's awesome. So we've got this slide pulled up. The text is a little too small for you guys. It's 236 days until the FCC sunset's supposed to take place. I know there's a lot of talk around this, but what exactly does this mean for maybe our end users on the chat, right?
Yeah, so just to be clear, we're not saying the sky's falling, right? We don't want to, this isn't a mandate. This isn't something that has to happen. What the FCC has said is that those people who would like to stop or discontinue utilizing copper in their, let's call it ISP portfolio, right? They're offering to their customers. They don't have to do that anymore. And they can walk away if they decide. They also can start charging whatever they would like. So what we do know about copper, we talked a couple examples a little bit ago, it's costly. When it goes out, you're talking trenching fees, you're talking permitting, you're talking digging around other existing utilities. This isn't cheap, it's not easy, and it usually takes a lot of time. And when this goes out, it actually costs those ISPs a lot of infrastructure money or basically, their budget for keeping this stuff going. And a lot of them, it costs them more to keep it running, especially after like a disaster or just in an area where the infrastructure is crumbling, to keep it alive. And for them, they would rather you go to either a cellular or a fiber solution. And obviously RCM, we're here to tell you that cellular is the way to go.
Yeah. So your service is not getting shut off, August 3rd, right? So it's just
You're not going to show up on that next Tuesday and be like, that's the panic button not working. However, you may get a letter from your ISP saying, hey, we've decided to discontinue this. Here are your options.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're stuck on what their options are versus you making the decision that's best for your team, your agency, whatever it may be. This is what our options are, and here's why we want to do it. And honestly, fiber trenching and putting fiber boards in and all that stuff, that's not cheap either. The infrastructure cost with that is generally in and around the same cost as a new copper line. So this is just my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And besides cost, something I think we talked about on the last one as well was security, right? Talking about, I can just hook my POTS lines into this device and hook it into my network and everything's fine. But then suddenly, you have all of your fire alarms, all of your panic buttons, they're all existing on the same network as everything else is. And whereas if you're using a cradle point, utilizing a wireless solution, that's all encapsulated. It's one solid network that goes out wirelessly and doesn't touch anything else.
And I forget the actual attack type, but wasn't one of the largest cyber attacks in reseller history done because it was a big box store, like home improvement store. They got through via the HVAC system. So they had their HVAC tied into their existing group. And I would mention them, but I don't want to mention what company it was.
Yeah.
Their orange logo. And they didn't get in because of payment terminals. They didn't get in because somebody clicked on a don't click here link. They got in because the HVAC system on somebody's access denial, put your password piece in. And so having those things integrated with your existing network and not parallel to keep you protected and having cybersecurity be a concern, it's something that we wouldn't recommend. And obviously parallel networks, the Cradlepoint product, other products on the market, parallel networks are there for a reason. And 256-bit encrypted tunnels and static IPs. There's so many ways on the networking side to make a traditional LTE solution work for you. It's much more secure than just having everything come to the same box.
Yeah, and it's really just the way to go, right? I mean, I saw, I want to say it was an article earlier today or yesterday, said cyber crime for 2021 was up 50%. And I can't imagine that number is going back down, right? It's just the way it's just the way it's moving, So, I mean, you got to move with it.
Yeah, and it's just it's the education barrier, right? Of just like the longer more of this goes on, the more we progress, the more people are going to have access to learn how to do these things, and that number is never going to go down again, more than likely.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I've actually switched off the slide deck so they can see our beautiful faces in full screen size. But so we'll go ahead and kick on the main discussion point. So I think if we want to start state and local governments, this is outside of my expertise zone. So what are they looking at here?
Yeah, so state and local governments, if you can go back to the slide or go to the slide that shows the different pieces.
Yes, let me actually put this.
If you just want to show it, and we can go back to the conversation. I just want to make sure people recognize the icons and the words, because state and local,
you're good.
Or even I would assume federal. I'm not sure. There's a lot of old federal installations that do not use newer technology because of the slow barrier to introducing new technologies. But let's stay at state and local. What we've noticed in the guns and hoses, police, fire, and just local gov in general, your panic buttons, right? They're going to be big time. Fax lines are big time. Again, we mentioned earlier, voice lines aren't. Most people have moved away from the voice line unless it's an emergent need voice line, like a prison or a hospital, something like that needs that to be there for whatever certification, qualification they may have. The other pieces that we see a lot of are elevators. Any building that has an elevator, that elevator has a call button. How that call button operates, if it's an elevator older than 10 years, there's a huge potential you're running old copper on that elevator. And that elevator has to have an open line of communication in case there's an earthquake, fire, somebody just gets stuck because of malfunction. So those would be the primary ones. Obviously, alarm systems are another one. However, I will say that alarm systems have been in use for years. Those solutions are typically ran by a third party. However, if you're interested in bringing that and condensing it, you can still keep your existing alarm panel and that provider, and we can just handle the backhaul if that's something that works. But that's where that $150 free POC visit works out. So that's what I would say. If you're talking state and local government, you're probably going to be dealing with panic buttons. Emergency call boxes are another one. Parking garages that are owned by the state, parking garages that are owned by a city. And then sometimes you have some payment terminals that aren't operated by third party that will also be on an old T1 line.
Yeah.
But that's very few far between. Panic buttons, alarm panels, fax lines, those are going to be our primary targets most of the time.
Okay, right on.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
Gosh, I love that I think you hit it right on the head whenever you said older than 10 years for buildings. And I think that's a lot to sink in because 10 years ago was not that long.
You're right.
And if your building is older than 10 years old and has an elevator in it, there is a good chance that it still has a POTS line in it. That was definitely something that was shocking to me is how many of those still exist. You would think they would be a little more updated.
But again, it's one of those things that as long as it works when I touch the button, why change it?
Yeah.
Well, the leverage point for this is twofold. And we should talk about one thing is that 3G fallback, right? We got the FCC piece, but another piece that would affect most of your POTS solutions that a lot of people haven't thought about. There's the FCC piece where they're letting ISP vendors walk away from it if they would like to, or charge what they will on those things. But then there's also the plan that in the last 10 years, a lot of the low tier LTE solutions on the market that are not supported, they don't have US based support. If you call a 1-800 number, chances are you're not getting someone that lives in your time zone. All those pieces, with the carriers deciding coming this next Q1, Q2 of next year, 3G is going away. Those frequencies are going to be repurposed for their 4G plus and their 5G needs, right? And so what we're seeing is a lot of that older equipment is going to leave you going, what the hell happened to my elevator?
Yeah.
You're going to sit there and you're going to go, I don't know what's going on. It must be the router. And what we're finding is many of those routers are either discontinued, end of life, or will not support your POT solution over the next year. So even if you get to August and you're safe, you might only get to February or March.
Yeah.
Find out my carrier turned this off because they're not doing 3G anymore. So it's another thing to keep in mind is if you have 3G cellular units already installed in your elevator, you might be looking at a refresh. And why not do it with something that's a fully turnkey solution that's managed versus something that you have to go and prove out yourself and make all the pieces work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of the 3G shutdown is starting at the beginning of the year, right? Like they have end
Into
times,
Q1.
end dates, but the start is going between that, right?
It's already started lighting up is what I'm being told at the beginning of January for several where they have a solid 4G, 5G footprint already, and they don't feel like 3G being in that network area is doing them any favors.
Yeah.
And so for them, they're like, why don't we repurpose this? Why don't we take up that real estate and apply it to our main cellular solutions for that 4G, 5G, and that mid-band? We're hearing a lot about mid-band, and the good news is our stuff is going to work perfectly on that. That whatever cradle point device or whatever device we end up going with, we're 4G, 5G ready.
Yeah. Absolutely. Real quick, Ben, can I get you to scoot in just a little bit? I just realized you're starting to drift off screen there. So sorry about that, guys. Cool. Yeah.
No.
Awesome. No worries. So so outside of the types of POTS lines, is there anything specific to state, local, federal governments that's going to be different from
the
other...
only thing I would say is your contracts. Everybody's contracts can be different. One thing we have found is a lot of the network professionals who operate all the network gear, buy your cradle points, they buy your Cisco, they buy the access points. They aren't the ones who implemented these ISP contracts or implemented the T1 line coming in. In a lot of ways, that was written into a bid, and the lowest bidder that could deliver on what was being asked won. So that means a lot of the equipment was as you recommend, right? It was whatever the ISP decided was going to go in there. And a time when I just need this copper at point A to talk to that copper retriever at point B, that might have been fine. But now that you have all these intelligent devices that you may be bringing off your current copper solution at some point, having that be something that a network IT group can manage effectively through a single pane of glass, like we were talking about earlier, without adding IT count.
Yeah.
Right. Not how do I do this? How do I bring this legacy equipment that I really didn't have to touch because it was as long as it worked, we were good, into an environment where now I'm responsible for it at some point, whether because it's on fiber and now it's connected to my main network, like we were talking about earlier, now you're at risk, or because I'm moving over to a cellular solution. How do I do this so that I don't have to take on all these new tasks and I don't have to put a new person in a seat so that they can do it? And we've seen a lot of that being the big difference in public safety, if you will, right? State and local government, they're now saddled with a decision. Do we add people that are going to take over this for us? And what does our contract look like? Is it a 3-year? Is it a 5-year? Are we stuck? Is there a clause where we can get out? And that is something that if you are looking at the next 12 to 24 months in the next year, we want to move away from traditional pots, or you get pushed to that. Those are things you're going to need to look outside of just the network gear itself.
Yeah. So one more thing before we move on to education. So I know you're a former Cradlepoint guy. Yeah. So I've noticed we've got a ton of Cradlepoint. We've got some Verizon, some other carriers, OEMs on the chat right now. What's the value of this? Like, we're not talking, 1 or 2 devices, 1 or 2 SIM cards for an implementation, right?
No, absolutely not. So for the Cradlepoint folks, and this isn't to, it is what it is, right? Yeah. So for both the Verizon and the Cradlepoint folks, what we're seeing is that most facilities, like I was just on the phone with a nonprofit a couple days ago. They have 27 facilities that end up being 42 POTS kits because the two major reasons. First reason is we support up to 8 lines on a single kit. So if you have more than that, you're going to need a second kit, which honestly might sound like a lot, but it's actually much better than what most ISPs do. And then the second piece that we're finding is, like we mentioned earlier, the copper didn't always go back to the same termination point. Yep. Well, if you have multiple 66 blocks in the main facility, and those could be on 100 yards apart, there is a huge chance they're not connected to the same system. They're all going out to the same ISP, but they're not all speaking at the same DMARC point.
Right.
So those are going to be facilities that need 2 or even 3 in some cases. The next piece is like a school district. I have one in the Pacific Northwest that we're working with. Yeah. They have currently 37 sites throughout their school district. Okay. And there's 159 POTS lines they currently pay for. Wow. And not to get into pricing on here, but honestly, we're saving them about $140 a site by just transitioning from their existing, and that's per month. So $140 to $156 a month per site times 37 sites. Yeah. Right. And so we feel very confident. Not only are we providing them a cost-effective solution, we're also providing them a solution that allows them to manage stuff like they've never been able to before. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I do think it's crazy to me saying it out loud like that, realizing that we've had these POTS lines and in a lot of cases in safety systems. And I mean, fire alarm companies are monitoring their fire alarms that they implemented, but a lot of times if you ask a customer, here, your POTS line's working? I don't know. Where do I go? Yeah, do it just work? Yeah. There's no lights, there's no LEDs on a 66 block. You don't know what's on, what's off. And going back to the why does it matter to the Verizon and the Cradlepoint reps, what I would say is these are terrestrial line customers who are working with existing ISPs. This is no different than back in the day 4 years ago when we were fighting like crazy to win over failover business. This is the exact same conversation. Yes, you might offend some of your wireline friends out there. You also might gain some wireline friends who see the writing on the wall and go, we need to do something different. This is not business effective and my customers don't like it. And so what we're seeing on the carrier side, we see a ton of multi-SIM activations per facility. Yeah. We also see a ton of wireline business coming over to cellular that was never there before. So these are incremental adds that nobody was looking at 2 years ago. Yeah. Right. And then on the Cradlepoint side, I love mobility. I love surveillance. All those things are great. Here's another way where you can do, multi 20, 30, 40 unit projects with the same cities we've already worked years at building relationships for. You might have sold them at Air 2200, at 3100 back in the day. That's one and done. You sell one failover device that's good for the next 5 to 7 years. You might not get another failover project with that customer for 4 to 5 years. But POTS line replacements, depending on their contract and everything like we were talking about, or adding new endpoints, that could be a multi-year, I need another 2. And now you start having a run rate customer who's, hey, we built a new building, new elevators going in, we need another kit. Right. Versus a one and done, I might talk to you in 3 years, as long as I made you happy. Yeah. And so this is, in my opinion, from the carrier and the OEM side, this is a chance for us to build long-term relationships, fully managed, turnkey, the customer's happy, and they're, we used to say it all the time, and it just works. Yeah. Right? They're just happy that it works. I don't have to touch it. I don't have to hire a new person. And if I do need help, I have somebody who's certified on Cradlepoint gear, who's certified to work with the partners on the carrier side, and we're good to go. Same thing we do for failover today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything to add to that?
Oh man, building lasting relationships. It is incredible to me how POTS can really help to do that, because a lot of times these aren't, onesie twosies or even projects like fleets. These are multi-day intimate projects where you're spending a lot of time on customer sites. You're really trying to look into these things, and you're getting to know the systems, you're getting to know the people, and you're making a lasting change that you can monitor and help them with moving forward.
And you're literally in the trenches. Like some of these
Mhm.
DMARC panels are in the back of washroom closets, in the
Mhm.
basement. Like, you're in the depths of what they call their networking, right?
Yeah.
You're in that dark network of stuff that they might not know it's there or what's not. I mean, we were dealing with a nonprofit that had a bunch of like answering phone, like old tape decks that play the old hold music.
Oh boy.
And they're like, yeah, it still works, but we don't know how. and so they've just been letting it go for years, and they trade. And so it's one of those things you really end up getting a much better understanding of who your customer is. And
Yeah.
it is, it's not time consuming as far as like, it's not going to waste their time,
Yeah.
but we definitely build the right solution to start. So it
Mhm.
works for the next 5 to 7 years with no fail.
Nice.
And it really gives you a full picture of a customer's network.
Yep.
I mean, until I went into a network room where I had previously worked on all of the proper networking equipment, the firewall, the cradle point, whatever it may be, and then getting to go back in and look at all the POTS lines that are running everywhere else in the building. It's like, oh, okay, now I really have a full understanding of every wire that's running through this building.
Yeah.
And then honestly, from the cradle point and carrier side, or any OEM for that matter, that then leads you into, okay, what are you doing for failover? Because I see a bunch of X, Y, and Z gear, but I don't see what I think you would want to have to make sure you're fully protected and fully covered. So then now all of a sudden we have that long-term, deeper conversation. We're not just doing POTS now. Now we're doing a holistic network approach. And honestly, that's the kind of customer I love. Somebody that's willing to do a little mobile, do a little surveillance, do some POTS.
Yeah.
And it's not just because of the monetary perspective from a business point. It's now because you have a holistic approach. If something goes on in their network, we can help them.
Yeah.
It's not 15 people they need to call to try to figure out what's going on.
Exactly.
It's one group that has the right connections with the OEMs, has the right connections with the cellular interface to make sure everybody's happy and not all the BS.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I like. I'm stealing this from Bill Foley, one of the greatest.
He's watching.
musicians
He's on here. Yeah.
Oh, hello, Bill. I'm stealing your term because I really enjoyed it the other day. Whenever you said, some people like to say one throat to choke, but he likes to say one hand to shake. I completely agree with that. Having a one point of contact, and not just having a one point of contact, so your customer, it's easier for them to go to one person, but also as an engineer, I can look at a customer's entire system from my own standpoint. I don't have to call up another company. I don't have to ask how this is working or how that's working. I know everything and can fix everything from that standpoint.
Yeah.
I did doing some stuff with a family business that my parents have, and I've helped them kind of set up their cradle point and their infrastructure. Having something go wrong when you have a customer in front of you, or you have an emergency or whatever it may be, and anytime business stops or anytime you're not able to do your job, it's an emergency. Whether people take it to level 10 or it's level 3, it's still something that you're worried about. Having to call somebody else and sit on a helpline to try to figure out, just to get a ticket started, let alone get it fixed that day. That's a huge difference between customer being happy and customer going, what the hell did I do here? And I think RCN, with our relationships we have in the industry, we have a way that not only can the customer do a lot themselves, see a lot themselves, but they have the backbone of our team and those manufacturing carrier teams. And having that team of individuals, right, those partnerships in place, that's something that I do not see the other resellers or manufacturers in the industry coming to the table with. It's a box delivery service. Here's a cradle point, go have fun. And it's like, that's not a solution.
Right.
That's just a piece of a solution. And if it goes wrong, you're not going to call your 1-800-BUY cradle point online reseller and figure out what's going on. You're going to have to pick up the phone and call somebody that knows what the heck they're doing.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. So I think we'll go ahead and move on to education real quick. I say real quick. We'll see how we.
No, honestly, this is not. So education's a little bit simpler of a conversation.
Oh, cool. Okay.
We do have gates and doors, right? A lot of schools, and I'm not trying to be down on anything, but some of the situations, the active shooters and lockdowns and all these things that we see happening in schools, alarm panels, panic buttons are something that absolutely is there. It's implemented. People are using it.
Yeah.
More and more parents want it, even if the school doesn't have it. And so what I would say, that's the biggest difference is that outside of like a jail or a correctional facility or an impound center, not every door and gate's going to be POTS line protected. But in schools, we're seeing a lot of that. A lot of gates, a lot of entryways, a lot of back doors. Right? They need to know if somebody opened the door and it wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, emergency call boxes. We have many schools that have a break glass here type call box, and even if it's not a break glass, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And many of them have an emergency. If I pick up that line, it starts dialing 911 right away. And we do see a lot of that. Elevators, you know, most high schools, especially if they were built in the last 20 years, they're going to have an elevator for ADA access. And so that's another piece. In fax line, almost every single school that I've worked with thus far has multiple fax lines. Typically just one, but we've seen multiple throughout the district. And so I would tell you this, public safety, 1 to 2 lines per site. K through 12, the average is around 3. So there's more lines per site. And sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, it's multiple POTS kits per site. So one school could end up being 2 kits because it was an afterthought. They trenched all that copper when the school was being built. They put in the alarm panel. They put in the fax machine. And then all of a sudden the PE teacher gets a new gymnasium. They didn't do the copper line. And now that's running on a separate system. Or it didn't come to the same DMARC board because, well, the street's 50 yards this way, but the school's 100 yards that way. Well, it's a lot cheaper to get to the street. And so they go to a different DMARC board, and that's that's a different POTS kit. And so that's the biggest difference I've seen. It's much of the same endpoint infrastructure. But the biggest difference is there's a little bit more added security and safety when it comes to K through 12, believe it or not.
So is it pretty similar K through 12 and higher ed then, or is there a difference?
No, the only thing we've seen in higher ed that's is much different. There's a couple of schools that are very large. Like in the Bay Area in California, where I come from, we had these when I was growing up, before we moved out to Idaho, and you know, blue light boxes, right? Larger larger high school campuses may have those, but a lot of that's a few and far between type solution. However, most colleges and universities have those. I would say a large majority, and I've talked to 14 in the last 4 weeks. All blue light customers. Their number one thing is, I've got a blue light kit. It's out in the parking lot. We cannot pay to replace the parking lot. How do we make this work? Oh, by the way, we need it moved 50 feet and I don't have power there. Well, RCN has the partnerships available to be able to bring that POT solution into that blue light pole, whatever we want to call it. And that is something that, again, our partnerships, our ability to give you that turnkey solution, it's beyond just what's in the closet.
Absolutely. We did move through that quite a bit quicker, and I think you answered some of the similar questions I'd had before. But yeah, I'm a little antsy. So let's talk about our POTS over LTE kit.
Cool.
So go ahead and put this up on the screen before we get moving.
It's all you, Jacob. I don't know how to manage.
All right, so let's look at
so many acronyms.
The POTS kit.
We might cover some of those too, if you don't mind. I know personally coming into it, ATAs and SIPs and customers talk about these things, and I'll tell you, some customers know everything, and it scares me because I'm like, listen, I am not. Let me get somebody smarter. But honestly, these are acronyms that keep getting thrown at them, either in their contract from their ISP or their ISP, like vendor reseller in the area. They start throwing, well, you're getting this many SIPs and this many ATAs, and they go, this is too much for me. Just make whatever it costs. And we see a lot of upcharge in areas that, honestly, it's not as complicated as people try to make people think. So anyway.
What are we looking at here, Jacob?
We're looking at a bit of a mess.
This is not our POTS replacement kit, just to put that out there. But
we put this up here just to kind of show. I mean, there is a large amount of variations in what we're seeing whenever we go into these DMARC locations, and you might be really shocked to hear that this really isn't even close to as bad as it can get in a lot of cases. And it's because so many of these things were afterthoughts. So many of these things were systems that were put in and maybe just neglected, and no one's been in that room for 20 years. That sort of thing. So I mean, it's old infrastructure, and things have just been built on top of it, and that's why those field checks, the site surveys, those are so important for us to go in and determine what each one of these pieces are, determine what's important, what needs to be replaced, and what needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
And
every site's different. That's the one thing. So I used to manage several retail stores, and every one of those had a different board with a different look and different equipment. And I can almost guarantee, I haven't been in a whole lot of tech closets in the last couple of years, but I could almost guarantee that every site's going to be a little different.
So you're talking same company, different stores where it's just all, wow. Yeah.
There's no cohesiveness. It's, if it breaks, we go in and we slap a new converter on, or we slap a new 66 block.
Yeah.
None of the old stuff gets removed because it costs more time and labor to remove it than just clipping the wires and leaving it. And so you end up with that, archaeological dig that I talked about earlier, where you're having to peel back the layers of the different decades that are on these boards.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, first secret of the industry I can share about all of these acronyms is that most of us don't know what they stand for either. We're just told them, and it's more important about what they do. And weirdly enough, a lot of the times the acronyms don't even make sense when you look them up, unless you're talking about POT specifically, which for those of you who don't know is plain old telephone service, which is very easy to remember. But so an ATA just refers to an analog translator. This is a device that takes any kind of IP information that comes from an internet source and turns it into analog information, and that's what a POTS kit or what a POTS line utilizes. Just a 2-pair versus a 6-pair. It's just turning it into less information essentially. A SIP refers to the line itself and how that communicates back to the system. Oh gosh. If you have 86 lines, you might say, oh, that's 86 SIPs or something like that. And that includes also a backend service that needs to be utilized and built in place. And that's pretty much the long and short of a lot of all these systems are something to give you a WAN source, preferably something wireless, so that way it's in a bubble by itself and it's also secure and reliable. And then something to translate that information from IP-based into analog-based. And then very, very importantly, our kit especially has a battery included in it. That way, in the case of a power outage or some sort of disaster, those POTS lines and those emergency phones can still be picked up and utilized immediately.
Yeah. Why don't we take a look at the POTS kit? All right, there she is. Beautiful.
She's got clean lines.
A little different than the last picture we looked at, but
Elon Musk would be proud.
Yeah. So I mean, how long have we had this kit? I mean, how's the build process been on it? Have we had any feedback, I guess, or from our installations? How's this going?
So actually with this particular box, we've gotten a lot of really, really great feedback.
Awesome.
But not from our customers just yet.
Okay.
So we're still in the works of this one. Couple of more things we had to go back to the drawing board on and get right, because we want to make sure we get it right for these things. But we're so incredibly proud of this, and we're very, very happy with how this turned out. From a design standpoint, it's going to be much, much easier to utilize. It's going to be much, much easier to produce, which of course means cheaper to produce, which I'm sure everyone appreciates, which is kind of shocking because really with the cheaper production, the less time and how we're making our kits, it really equals out, because I think a lot of people would see this and go, oh, that's really fancy. I don't know if that's in my price range. Whenever our pricing, as far as I know, isn't changing actually. And so we're actually being able to provide a much more premium service, I think, while still being able to keep in line with the competitors, which is really, really awesome.
Yeah, I love the organization of it, and really the way it looks doesn't matter, with the exception of the guy who goes into that room every 10 or 20 years. But yeah, we're pretty proud of this. I know you've done a lot of work with it, and Josh, our what is his title? Just lead it.
Production manager.
Production manager. There we go. Yeah, they've done a lot of work on this, and it's.
Yeah, and the big thing with this was actually ease of use, funnily enough. It was, I don't want to say it's by coincidence that it looks so nice, but a lot of that's just great work from our graphic design and marketing team. But this was actually designed because we wanted something that was a lot more turnkey, a lot more easier to assemble, and something that was really just made for us and what we wanted to do with it. Yep.
Awesome. So how customizable is this in terms of partners that we're working with different carriers? Like what how's it work?
Very customizable. All of the biggest carriers and even utilizes, I believe they can hold 4 or 5 different OEMs.
Oh, nice. Point. Okay.
Utilizes the same battery across the board, which is our standard battery, 12 mAh, which is very, very high. We've had this was actually a kit that we had installed, and we hooked it into the electrical panel of an elevator.
Mhm.
And we come to find out that actually the elevator wasn't providing enough voltage to keep the battery charged and the kit. So as soon as that kit went down, we immediately found out, gave them a call and said, hey, looks like something's going on. We're sending somebody out there. Come out there. We had found out that our battery had been on for several days, and when nobody even noticed that it wasn't receiving enough voltage.
Yeah.
So really, really cool in that part. That was a accidental field test.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we were very glad to see that. I'm very glad that it was working for as long as it was. We're actually making this totally modular to where it can have a WAN port. It can even utilize Wi-Fi, completely closed in, of course, because you want to keep this closed in. But in events where you're trying to utilize such as Wi-Fi as WAN and things like that, that is going to be possible with this kit.
One thing I'd like to mention, this has come up, is so you see the two little copper gold looking SMA connectors. So a lot of people, the DMARC board, we talked about it. There's a plethora of places we have found these, closets and basements. And so one thing that we are able to do using our OEM partnerships on the antenna side, no matter where you need to put this, as long as our installers have the ability to do what's necessary, we're going to be able to give you an antenna or that signal strength and quality that we need to operate effectively. If that means we do an external antenna, if it means we just plumb one up to the next floor out of the basement, there's so many options available to us, no different than what we do with failover today. So I know it's a standard, OEM cradle point type conversation. Antennas and cradle points go hand in hand in a lot of ways, but we do have a lot of people who are like, well, my stuff's in the basement, this isn't going to work. Rest assured, it's going to work.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Awesome. Yeah. I'll move on. I know we talked about a lot of these different use cases earlier. So the POTS over LTE kit, anything, right? No issues across the board, whether you're public sector, commercial, education, whatever. Just
what I would say is the easy answer is yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like we're going to go where you need us to go. That's not a problem. But I would say this: we've talked about all the different types of infrastructure that are in place. If you are interested in seeing what our POTS kit can do for you and how many lines we can operate and pricing, all that, call us, tell us what you're looking for, and then let's get a site survey plan, right? I would say that going into this without knowing how you would make that transition is not a great idea. You want to know exactly what you're getting yourself into. And again, like Jacob mentioned earlier, we want to know. We need this to work for you for the extended future. And the only way to do that is make sure we have a solid foundation and solid blueprint. We can't do that without that site survey. And honestly, I wouldn't want to do one without a site survey, just because in a lot of these situations, these are emergency comms. Right? We have to keep this up and running. We don't want to put our name on anything that's going to lead us to not supplying you with connectivity when it matters most. And so
absolutely,
that would be my only suggestion there is that, we'll work with all kinds of stuff, but we need to go see what that all kinds of stuff is.
Yeah, that's what I expect more attitude right there for sure.
Absolutely. And I wanted to also kind of give a call to action on this pre-consultation that we're giving out at the end of this.
You got it.
I know I've kind of evangelicized it before that more people should take advantage of this, but in this situation, I really, really would take advantage of this. If you don't know that you have POTS lines or you don't know how many or what's being utilized, please, by all means, give us a call. That's exactly what we're here for. We can get the conversation going. We can fill in the blanks for you and learn everything you need to learn to get your system back up and running.
The other thing I would say is I would put the onus on your existing ISP. You're going to find out real quick if you're going to be taken care of over the next 12 to 24 months. If you call them and say, what are you doing about this? And whatever answer they give you back, you'll be able to read between the lines and the tea leaves involved and go, am I being fed a bill of goods, or is this somebody that actually has my intentions my best intentions at heart? And what we've seen and what we've actually done with customers in several situations is they've called and their ISP has no idea what they're going to do with stuff over the next 12 months. And that's something to think about, is what RCN's built here, what Cradlepoint's been building into similar solutions for years. This is something that we've been diligently working on for years to make sure we deliver the right product.
Yeah.
Go with the folks that have your best intentions at heart, and at minimum, ask the folks you're dealing with today, what are their plans? And I think you'll see really quickly, what light at the end of the tunnel, which way is shining.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I've got Ben and team. How can we be more strategic in West focused on public sector?
West focused?
Yeah, strategic, maybe in Western
Like
areas?
the Western states?
I guess so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if we're talking Intermountain, Utah, Nevada, I don't know why Nevada is considered West Coast. I love Nevada, grew up
I'm
across
from
the board.
Vegas, so careful.
There you go. I wouldn't consider it the Bay Area. But with that being said, we could big sky country for sure. It's got the traction is basically going to come down to leveraging your existing relationships, but not getting stuck like we talked about earlier. In many situations, your networking person is not the person you're going to start this conversation with from a what are you doing next. We're seeing a lot more procurement folks are the ones in charge of those ISP lines.
Yeah.
They pay it every month. They make sure that the contract is being met. How many people have you talked to and they're like, our internet keeps going down and we don't know why? And typically the network guy doesn't know why either. He just knows whoever the provider isn't providing.
Right.
And so I would start the conversation at the high level. Talk to your networking person. Talk to who's ever in charge of telecom. Talk to procurement folks. Diversify who you're talking to, because in a lot of situations, the mobility expert for that agency or that department is not going to be your telecom solutions provider expert.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'd say. The West is no different than the East. It's just a matter of let's get on the phone and work it. And if you want my help, Bob Ainge's help out on the West Coast, there's not a place we're not willing to call into with you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Let's see. Next one. Do you think the FCC will extend its deadline?
No.
No?
They already did.
Oh.
They've already done in the past. It was supposed to be pre-COVID. This was all supposed to die out, just like the 3G conversation.
Yeah.
So this has already been on life support for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say no, absolutely not. And if you think, I'll make a bet. Call me.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I don't think there's a chance that they extend the deadline. And like we were talking about, it isn't, the FCC isn't going to come into your DMARC closet with a pair of scissors or anything.
Yeah.
But I mean, they are essentially going. Companies are going to have the opportunity to do really whatever they want with these lines, which is not where you want to be with them.
Right. Yeah. I having no insight into that whatsoever, I would think even if for some reason they did extend it, the providers know that it's ending. So why would you want to just drag that out?
No, and I understand that. And what I would say is the federal government's already come out and said what they plan and why, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole reasoning. And honestly, if you go to the FCC, type in FCC POTS sunset, right? And you're going to see something from RCN at the top. FCC is going to be right underneath there.
Yeah.
And then if you read that, it talks about why they're getting rid of it. This isn't a we would like to because this is we're doing this and here's why. And there's some very specific reasons and cost to infrastructure, the inability for people to dial out when they need to because of different things that are happening, whether they be environmental or just infrastructure based. The FCC doesn't want anything to do with this, and they want to give those companies the chance to operate them as a normal business and not be mandated. Here's what you can charge, and here's how long you have to do it for.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of money backing that decision as well from the commercial side of those telecom providers. Don't want to be involved with it either. They lose money on these lines.
Yep.
So.
Absolutely. Last question. What is the price of hardware plus data in your solution?
So the pricing is different. And there's multiple pieces. And again, it comes down to what you have on board, what type of traffic we're passing. Like we mentioned, we can fit several different OEM solutions into this box. Each one's going to be for a different flavor that you have on site. So if you would like pricing, reach out, call us. We'll, you're on today's webinar, you have a free site survey. We can help you take care of that part of it real quick and give you a real finite idea of what a per site cost may cost you in the long run. The other thing is there's 3 ways to buy. So I will share that, right?
Yeah.
So you can buy the kit from us with all the goodies inside. You can buy the kit managed. So option 2, right? You can buy it fully managed, bring your own data, or you can utilize us. You saw the RTech piece on there. Our sister company are the data and management side of our house for some of these hardware endpoints. That's the other way. So fully turnkey, fully managed, one bill to pay for all your sites, very clean. And your carrier rep of choice is a part of that conversation every step of the way because of our relationships we've built over the years with our carrier team. So no matter how you want to do business, buy it direct and take care of it yourself. Buy it from us and then have your own data lines because you already have those cemented on the public sector side for years to come, or have a fully managed solution with your data of choice on board. We've got you covered, and that I will share.
Yeah,
Other than
absolutely.
that, give us a call. We'll give you pricing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And,
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, actually, during the rest of the conversation, I was thinking it's actually only 3 OEMs, but I got confused because we can fit 2 different cradle points inside.
Right. That I know where you're
For
coming
different
from.
utilizations. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, and I would add, we offer a 2-port, a 4-port, and an 8-port solution. But you can still get a 2-port with only 1 line on it, and that's going to be cheaper than, a 2-port with 2 lines. And all the other different variations.
Yep.
So worth noting.
The other piece is just the data. Like we've seen, there are some drastic differences between different data alarm panels. Like there are some alarm systems that are motion detector, right? And the total kilobits used is so much higher than a motion detection system versus a physical intrusion detection system. The total number of kilobits used on a monthly basis is going to be so much different. So it's hard to give a data conversation without knowing more about your unique situation.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to put our last poll up here. So this is how did we do today? So it's just a 1 to 5 star. If you enjoyed it, feel free to give us a 5 star. If you didn't, feel free to rate us lower. This just lets us know we can do better. If you rate us lower, I'm going to blame it on Ben. So
I'm totally blaming on Jacob.
I saw the look in your eye. But awesome. Well, you guys fill that out. I want to share this link. This is how you can take advantage of that POTS consultation. Just go to rcntechnologies.com/crash course. There is a thank you. There's a little form on there that you can fill out, and we'll be in touch. But with that being said, we've reached the end of this. Do you guys have any parting words you want to give to our guests here?
No. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Again, reach out. Website, all our contact information is there. LinkedIn, Facebook. And if you're not following us on Facebook and LinkedIn, do that because we put out some great content.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Thank you everyone who watched, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks guys.